Well, hello everyone, and happy Sunday evening. It's Sunday, and I'm not quite sure what the date is today. April 28th. Wow, April's almost over. And I hope your spring is going well, and I hope people start coming on here. I forgot to advertise that I would be on. Welcome, you guys. Thanks for joining me. And I'll just talk for a few minutes here, hoping that others join us. Tonight's episode of Syria Face to Face. My name is Janice Courtcamp, and I've been researching Syria and the Middle East conflicts over the past 6.5 years or so. Put in many thousands of hours doing that, and I've also traveled to the Middle East 6 times to Syria, 5 times to Lebanon, and once to Kuwait to get a feel for the reality on the ground there in those countries. And I've really focused on Syria, of course, and I love that country. But in the course of those investigations of what was really going on in Syria, that ended up mushrooming to studying all of the conflicts that have been going on there, particularly the current ones, and the backstories, why they happened and how, and what were the goals and purposes of it. And for the last 2 weeks, this is the third week in this series of Israel's role in the conflicts in the Middle East and how they've impacted things there. And the last 2 weeks, I've really been focusing on basic facts about Israel, false narratives that have been really pushed on us over the last 7 decades in particular, and especially since 9/11. And also their plans in the region for expansion, for becoming an energy exporter themselves, as well as energy independent, and how that has played a role in all of these things, a major role in all of these things. And tonight, though, we're going to look at the impact of Israel on America, because this is really huge. A lot of Americans think that those wars are going on over there, and we should support Israel, and they're our best ally and great partner, and all of these things. But tonight I want to argue the other side, and I'm going to argue that Israel, in fact, is not an ally of America, quite the opposite, in my opinion. And that really this one-sided, very pandering relationship that we have with Israel has caused Americans huge problems, and is, in fact, I believe, a threat to Americans, our freedoms, and our future. And that may sound pretty crazy to a lot of people who've never heard this before. And so, again, I'll try to be diplomatic and share some of the things that I've been learning as an American over the last 6 years about this relationship. So welcome, everyone. It's great to see you all, and I hope you're having a good evening. I wanted to start by explaining a well-known strategy. And this is not unique to Israel or its lobby here in the U.S. This is a time-tested strategy that many groups and movements have employed. And, I call it taking the high ground, but not in the sense that we usually mean that. Usually that means, we're going to take the moral high ground, the high ground of integrity. I'm talking more in a tactical sense, a strategic sense of taking, the highest ground on a battlefield and the advantage that that gives you. And so the strategy really is considered as taking control or having as much influence as possible over the mountains, over the high ground of any given society that you're trying to influence and even take control over. And Israel and its lobby has done a very effective job, in my opinion, of taking these mountains. The mountains that I'm referring to are the spheres within a society. So I'm talking about economic sphere, which is the financial world, the wealth of a country or an area, the political sphere, of course, media and the general cultural conversation, academic, academia, education system in the sense of, kind of raising up the next generation to do your will as well. Arts and sciences, and of course, military and security forces and services. A strategy like this, it's not a conspiracy theory. Again, this has been used by many groups and movements over the years. A strategy like this requires a great deal of patience because it's a multi-generational strategy. And, a lot of effort and a lot of focus. I think that it also requires a vision and a unifying motivator. A long-term strategy like this is like a long con job, a swindle. And it takes time for it to unfold. It also takes time to recognize it and track it. And its effectiveness can really only be measured over a great deal of time. Hi guys, I see people saying hi. Hello. Since I focus on America's conflicts, and particularly the conflicts in the Middle East, I'm limiting my talk tonight to just a few of those mountains that have been heavily influenced or dominated by the pro-Israel lobby here in the U.S. and how that's affecting us as a society. If we do not get a handle on this, let me close the door because there's a conversation going on there. Home video. If we don't take this time, this window of opportunity that we have as Americans, and I'm speaking as an American about the American situation, although this is happening, of course, in other countries like Australia, all around in Europe, even Canada, and even in Russia. So this is something that we all have to be, all of us in those countries have to be watchful for. And if we don't start holding our governments accountable for the really bowing down that they're doing to Israeli interests, then what we're going to see are continued efforts to destabilize the Middle East and create more conflicts there, like the conflict in Iran is looming. And this would not only weaken our economy here in America tremendously, as the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and Libya and Syria and all of these others have, by putting us in horrific debt and racking up bills of many billions of trillions of dollars, $5.6 trillion since 9/11 spent on these wars, and many more trillions lost actually in the Pentagon. So it will continue to bleed our economy dry. We will continue to send our sons and daughters many thousands of miles overseas to fight in never-ending wars that are total disasters and failures. But it also has now the makings of a possible World War III scenario, which we all, I'm assuming if you're a mature responsible person, would realize that that is a nightmare scenario. And so the time is now to speak out, and that's why I'm taking this time to talk about these issues in such length over the last 3 weeks. Einstein is credited as saying, "I do not know what weapons World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." And that gives you some idea of the seriousness of what could be in our future if we do not take on really stopping these wars of aggression and understanding why we're involved in these wars of aggression, particularly in the Middle East, where the stakes now are so very high. In addition to the consequences of war, we have a continuing erosion as Americans of our freedoms here. So, for example, there are 26 states, and I think it's even gone up might be 27 or more now, that have some kind of prohibition against free speech and freedom of protest when it's in regards to criticizing Israel. And it's classified as a hate speech. There's a huge effort, and has been a huge effort over the years, to equate Israel and the Zionists who created it and have run it with Jews overall. And so they say that it's anti-Semitic, for example, to criticize Israel. It's a hate crime. You hate Jews. You want any of their Holocaust, blah, blah, blah. That is not true for the huge, vast majority of people who are criticizing Israel, including the many Jews, even Holocaust survivors, who have been criticizing Israel. It's a tactic only in this strategic war of taking over these mountains of domination within our society. So part of these laws, and this is very important for Americans to understand, because the laws that they were trying to enact through Washington, D.C. to be federal laws kind of sputtered, did not get really codified into law. There was kind of a general law made about hate speech, I think. I don't even know if that's gone to the president yet. But what the strategy is now is to do this state by state, and they've been very effective in that, to the point that in Texas, there was a town that got heavily damaged in a recent hurricane. This was a couple of years ago. And in order to get FEMA funding, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, disaster funding to help them rebuild their town, they were being asked and required to sign a document that said, as a town, they would not participate in what is called BDS, or criticize Israel. And the town, initially they were going to sign it, but some of them were kind of like, some of the the officials of the town were like, what in the world is this? And they got the ACLU involved, and thankfully the ACLU won the lawsuit, and they were not required to sign that really stupid document. Israel has nothing to do with whether or not a town in Texas gets Federal Emergency Management Agency funding to rebuild after a hurricane. It was absolutely insane. But this is the kind of measures that are going on, kind of a drip, drip, slowly, slowly eroding our freedoms that are given to us by the Bill of Rights for freedom of speech and freedom of protest. Another example is the teacher that was required to sign a similar form, and she refused. She's Muslim, and she refused. And this actually has happened in many states as well, where state employees are required to sign an agreement that they will not criticize Israel or engage in BDS. Now, believe it or not, there are a lot of Americans that have no idea what BDS is, and it stands for Boycott, Divest, and Sanction. And it targets Israeli-made products that have come, that are exported around the world. And the movement calls for people to boycott these products. And this is kind of a grassroots thing that we can all do to apply economic pressure against Israel for their crimes against the Palestinians, for example. Well, BDS has caused quite an uproar, and it has resulted actually in, Israel panicking a little bit and not wanting to feel any kind of economic backlash for their policies. And it's been extended, so that companies would divest any holdings that had to do with Israel, and hope for, at some point, sanctions against Israel to apply pressure again against their policies. Well, like I said, Israel kind of panicked about that, and it hasn't had a huge effect except, let's say, propaganda-wise, as people around the world, and here even in America, have started waking up to the realities of what Israel is really all about. It's one of the signs that they're losing what they call the Hearts and Minds campaign to basically propagandize and brainwash us all into supporting them. So I'm talking about why it matters to Americans about this very one-sided relationship we have with a foreign country, foreign entity, 5,000 miles away from us, and what this is all about and what it's costing us as Americans. And the erosion of our freedoms is huge. Another issue that Americans need to be aware of when talking or thinking about why we should or should not support Israel is Israel's illegal nuclear program, their nuclear weapons program. And it's not actually just a nuclear weapons program. There's an illegal biological weapons and chemical weapons programs as well. Now, why do I say it's illegal? It's illegal because Israel refuses to sign any of the non-proliferation treaties, in effect, regarding nuclear weapons, biological weapons, or chemical weapons. They refuse to have their facilities investigated or, looked at. They refuse to even admit that they have these programs. It's very well known that they have these. And in addition to all that, they actually started their nuclear program, their illegal nuclear program, by stealing weapons-grade uranium from the United States with collusion of people here. And so, all of this should be this huge, massive scandal and issue, but it's simply not. And most Americans just do not know about these things. Many people focus on Israel's nuclear deterrent program, and this is something that was written about by many people, but there's a book called The Samson Option by Seymour Hersh, and he's describing the nuclear program of Israel, and they are estimated to have now between 70 to 300 nuclear warheads. And they are not all land-based. They have submarines and aircraft capable of launching nuclear weapons from either the sea or the air. So their capability is obviously quite vast. The Samson option that Seymour Hersh and others talk about is a policy of Israel that should an army invade them, that they would retaliate with nuclear weapons against the invading country. So, for example, in 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, the Samson option was being weighed, and they were planning on possibly nuking both Damascus and Cairo in that war, had the war not shifted in their favor. So this is something that's very serious and frightening, and since they are the only nuclear power in the region, it has been, that's a significant deterrent. If somebody says they're going to blow your capital city off the map, then they, that's a pretty stern warning. Of course, Egypt and Syria were trying to take back land that had been lost when Israel had started the 1967 war, and documents prove that they actually started that war against Syria and Lebanon, and Egypt, and they took that land. And 73, you're going back to try to regain that land, and all of a sudden you're being threatened with a nuclear strike. And this was an almost, missiles of October scenario. And the whole world, Russia and the US, were on a high alert for a possible nuclear exchange to happen. So very frightening stuff. But like I said, for me personally, after looking through all this, I'm actually a little more concerned now with these other weapons, the biological and chemical weapons. Israel is also one of the leading manufacturers of drones, and they have these new generations of what's called suicide drones, where the drone, if it's locked on by a signal, it's not trying to drop a payload, in other words, and return home. It literally it's full of bombs, it's full of explosives, and it dives to whatever signal is locking onto it. So they're called suicide drones. And they and other countries like the US are working on new drone technology, which are called swarm drones. So you could have literally a swarm of weaponized drones doing your bidding in whatever country. So these are very serious threats to the other countries in the region. And now, Israel has not been afraid to use weapons against their allies to prove a point or to gain concessions or to frame their enemies to get concessions or whatever they want. This was proven in the brutal attack that they did against the USS Liberty in 1967, when they murdered, I think it was 34 or 32 U.S. Navy men on the USS Liberty in a total horrific attack, where the ship, according to the Liberty survivors, was clearly marked an American ship. We have evidence that shows that the Israelis knew that it was an American ship, and yet they continued to fire on it, and they even strafed the lifeboats. The guys were trying to get into the lifeboats, but they strafed the lifeboats to make them useless. They were actually trying to sink the ship. And there was a massive cover-up by the U.S. government. They didn't, Lyndon Johnson said he didn't want to embarrass our good allies of Israel. And since that time, the relationship has continued to spiral downward to get to the point now where I'm going to argue that Israel used to be the tail of the dog, but now, in fact, in American politics, in foreign policy especially, they are the dog. How am I doing here? Thank you all. I appreciate the show of support. I've just been kind of going on and on. Another issue that Americans need to be aware of and concerned about is how much money Israel takes from us. And the recent deal, the package deal that was put through, started under Obama and came into effect under President Trump, is that we have promised Israel $3.8 billion each and every year for the next 10 years. And this is guaranteed. President can't even sign away this. This is basically written in stone that they will get. I think it equates to, it's like $10 million each and every day, or a little bit over 10 million. That comes right about out of our taxes as U.S. American taxpayers. And what's infuriating about this is Israel continues to boast of its robust economy, to the point where, they're a major weapons exporter. We send that money to them in, military aid, theoretically. They have universal health care, free health care, basically. And their education system is very inexpensive for people wanting to get degrees. And so here we are in the US, where I think it's something like 60% of the people now declaring bankruptcy are doing that because of medical bills. I know we, as a typical middle class family, are really struggling. You know, I have to work basically to afford health care here, as many families are having to do. And a university is crazy expensive, to where young people who aren't from rich, wealthy families, you know, they either join the military, like I said last time, and I have to double check to see if this is still the case. Somebody asked me, but I think so, to get a degree or to get help getting a degree, or they have to take out huge loans that they'll be paying on. Literally, they pay those off for decades after they graduate. And yet here we are shipping off this money, $10 million a day to Israel, and the Israelis have free health care and cheap education. So you tell me why that makes me angry and frustrated as an American. But that 10 million each and every day is only the disclosed aid that we give to Israel. So for example, the CIA gives Israel intelligence aid, and we're not even allowed to know how much that is. So it's our money. It's supposed to be the government of, by, and for the people, and we're not even allowed to know how much of our money is actually going to a foreign country 5,000 miles away. And I'm sorry, we get not one single benefit from this relationship. I have looked and looked, and I do not find a single benefit to this particular political relationship that we have. In fact, just exactly the opposite. Another example of funding that most people don't know about, and I'm thankful to Cynthia McKinney, who's a great one to follow about this issue. She was a congresswoman, and she told, during her time in Congress, she talked about how people in Congress are forced to basically sign a pledge of allegiance to Israel in order to get any money, any lobby money whatsoever. I'm not talking about just the pro-Israel lobby money. I'm talking about lobby money, period. And you can't operate in Washington without money. And I'm actually going to go into that a little bit later. Unfortunately, you know, the swamp is run on money. That's the whole basis for what happens in Washington. Another example of how Jewish institutions, for example, get a lion's share of money is through the Department of Homeland Security, and it's a grants program that gives money to nonprofit organizations for improving security of their facilities against terrorism. Well, Jewish institutions get 90% of that entire grant budget. And so over the last 4 years, Jewish institutions have received 120 million of the 131 million grant funds available through these grants. That's over 90% of this grant money goes to Jewish institutions. And this is just yet another example of how one-sided and how, there's one group of people or one country that's put above all others, and the rest of us are just these schmucks that have to kind of deal with this situation. And I'm a schmuck, and I'm sick of dealing with it. I'm sick of this. Another important factor is, Mary, we are, as a population, we are clueless about this. You're right. Another thing that most Americans aren't aware of is that Israel spies on us. And I mean on our country as well as us personally. So in 2009, there was a secret agreement made with Israel, between our government and Israel, that literally places no legal limits on use of our data by Israelis. It's a free flow system that whatever the NSA or any other one of these numerous alphabetical agencies get on us, that they will just automatically share that with Israelis, including our personal information. Only U.S. government communications are protected in that agreement. So the government is protecting itself, but not us. Israel was actually identified as the third largest, or the third biggest, how do I put this, target. Our government is aware of this. Actually, Israel is now the third biggest target alongside Iran and China for our cyber attacks against them, which is really bizarre. But the problem has been that since 2007 and then this agreement in 2009, you have something called the U.S.-Israel SIGINT, something intelligence relationship. And a person that was interviewed, I think it was by Glenn Greenwald, but I can't remember. It was written up in The Guardian, so I'll include that in my list of resources when I finish compiling that for you. But this NSA guy said that in the last decade, the whole U.S.-Israeli security arrangement has tilted heavily in favor of Israeli security concerns. 9/11 came and went, and with NSA, which is the National Security Administration's only true third-party counterterrorism relationship, being driven almost totally by the needs of the partner, which would be Israel. So we have this very one-sided intelligence relationship also with Israel, in addition to a one-sided sending money relationship. And, we're going to delve into more of this one-sided relationship. Oh, I didn't know what I forgot to mention. In the weapons program, there is a congressman now, Lou, I think his name is, and he is co-sponsoring a bill to have our research and development people for weapons to work alongside Israel to develop directed energy weapons. And so not only would Israel then get directed energy weapons on top of their biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons and conventional weapons, but also this new technology of directed energy weapons, as well as the ability and the knowledge of our directed energy weapons to be able to foil those if they wanted to. So that seems to me not the best situation. I hate the whole idea. But going back to the spying that Israel does on the U.S. and American citizens, let's see, where am I in my notes? Many people, of course, over the years have been charged with espionage for Israel here in the States. Jonathan Pollard is one well-known name. He gave top secret classified information to Israel. But there have been many others, just, people that worked with Israel to steal our weapons-grade uranium, for example. There's a guy named Steve Rosen, and he worked for the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which we all know as AIPAC. And AIPAC, of course, drives the fundraising efforts for U.S. members of Congress. And we're going to talk more about AIPAC as we go. Good, we're good time-wise. Steve Roseman and Keith Weissman, who both worked for AIPAC, were accused of providing defense secrets to the chief political officer at the Israeli embassy in Washington, whose name is Naor Gilan, about U.S. policy toward Iran and al-Qaeda. And they were doing this in partnership with a former Pentagon analyst. The former Pentagon analyst, who wasn't Jewish, the other two guys were and worked for AIPAC, got put in jail for 12 years. And these guys, the other two, are out scot-free, the two that work for AIPAC. The case ended up being dropped, as many are, by the Department of Justice. I'm talking about many cases of spying on behalf of Israel. The cases are dropped, or they're very few little penalties or what have you. Basically, the court ruled that the case was unwinnable and the trial would disclose classified information. However, it was found out that a member of Congress by the name of Jay Harman was secretly taped telling an Israeli agent that she would put pressure on the Justice Department to reduce spying charges against the two former AIPAC officials. In return, the Israeli agent offered to get a wealthy donor who helps fund election campaigns for Nancy Pelosi. Such a deal. The then minority leader of the House of Representatives is Nancy Pelosi. And this was to pressure Pelosi to appoint Harman to a senior position on the Congressional Intelligence Committee. So here we have this Congresswoman, Harman, who is working to get campaign funds for Nancy Pelosi through an Israeli agent. And she's working with this Israeli agent to get these spy charges dropped or reduced against these two AIPAC guys that were giving defense information to the Israeli embassy. So it was just a huge mess. And I do not know what happened to Harman, actually. I need to follow up on that. And this leads us all to AIPAC. I put up two links in the description of this video, and the first one is for this video of a guy named M.J. Rosenberg. Excuse me. M.J. Rosenberg worked at AIPAC for 6 years, and then he was working on Capitol Hill as a lobbyist for 15 years after that. Steve Rosen, the guy that was one of the two AIPAC guys that were indicted for espionage against the U.S., was his boss. And Rosenberg said, Steve Rosen is still around because you're allowed to get indicted for espionage against the U.S. depending on who you're doing it for, and that meant for Israel. He sent this guy, M.J. Rosenberg, Steve Rosen sent Rosenberg a memo, and Rosenberg actually sent it to the Washington Post, and it was a memo that Steve Rosen, the guy, again, who was indicted for treason, it was a memo sent to M.J. Rosenberg on his second day of employment at AIPAC, and he said, do not ever talk about anything the lobby does outside of the lobby. In other words, don't tell anybody what we're doing here. And he wrote, Steve Rosen, the traitor guy, wrote, a lobby is a night flower. It thrives in the dark and shrivels up in the sunlight. And this is what we're doing, is we're bringing these things out into the sunlight, and we're trying to wake people and shake people up here as to what this relationship really is about. Many people watching this, of course, know about these things, but most Americans have no clue. And we're talking basically now about Israel spying on us and how that happens. And there are many ways that they do that. One is by a group of people called the Sayanim. I think that's the pronunciation. Sayanim, Sayanim. And the Sayanim are what are called Mossad's little helpers. Mossad is the Israeli intelligence service, of course, similar to our CIA. Mossad's mantra and mission statement is war by deception. Okay. The Sayanim are Mossad's little helpers, and estimates vary. Nobody knows exactly how many there are. I've seen estimates like 100,000, and I've seen estimates up to 1 million. But basically, they're normal people. They have to be 100% Jewish. You can't be Jewish mom and non-Jewish dad, for example. It has to be 100% Jewish. They can be doctors, lawyers, journalists, business owners, what have you. And their job is basically to act as Mossad's eyes and ears. And they can report what they see and hear to the Mossad. But also it's kind of this networking of people around the world. So if a Mossad agent needs help, if he needs medical help, he can go to a signing doctor, or they need, some kind of legal assistance, or they get help with getting passports and going through airport immigration and all kinds of stuff. So these are the Mossad's little helpers. That's another tool in the toolbox of Israel to spy on us all and get what they want in the world. There's also the Bodim, or Badim, however you say it, which is kind of the younger version of the Sayanim, which are, the Bodim are college kids that they recruit for the same purposes. And then they also have what's called the Hasbara army. And this is this vast army of people that are tasked, are involved with making Israel look good. They're the ones that are online all the time, looking at Facebook posts that are about Israel or Palestine or any AIPAC or any of these things. They'll be the ones that pop on my screen from time to time, and they'll, kind of tell the classic false narratives, and they debate and all this stuff. And that's the Hasbara army. So you have those three behind the scenes things. Hi, Sid. You can come in anytime. Then you have the Mossad, which of course is war by deception, and has the world's, one of the world's most famous armies of assassins. But I want to finish tonight with talking about AIPAC, and this is the massive pro-Israel lobby here in the U.S. AIPAC is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. There are over 300 pro-Israel advocacy groups in the U.S., and they're, of course, tax-free here. And the issue with AIPAC in particular, all these pro-Israel advocacy groups, is the massive amount of wealth that they funnel into Washington to our elected officials. Benjamin Netanyahu was recorded on a hidden video. He was in the home of some settlers, illegal settlers, in a settlement in the West Bank. And he told them straight out, he just said, America is something that you can easily maneuver and move in the right direction. And he was talking about how easy we are to manipulate into doing what Israel wants. And this is because of the pro-Israel lobby. There's a quote from 1895. William McKinley's um, campaign manager said, "There are two things that are important in politics. The first is money, and I can't remember what the second one is. Money drives everything that happens in Washington." This guy, M.J. Rosenberg, again, he was the guy who worked for AIPAC, and he was not one of those that was a traitor and doing the spying. He was the guy who worked for one of those guys. And he gave a talk at a conference for the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs. And the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs has been tracking AIPAC and affiliated organizations and individuals for 37 years. And they've been monitoring pro-Israel PAC contributions to congressional and presidential candidates since 1986. I'm almost done. In 2015, they hosted a conference called Israel's Influence, Good or Bad for America, and this is where I heard this talk on YouTube from this guy, M.J. Rosenberg. And he said, basically every decision Congress makes is made with an eye on who has the money and how can a legislator either get some of it or avoid it being deployed against them. And then he went on to say, yes, Middle East policy is determined by the highest bidder, which is AIPAC. He made that statement very loud and clear, and he worked again both in AIPAC and as a lobbyist on the Hill for 15 years after that. Do you mind if I go on? Let's see. I'm going to go on just for another minute here. So in addition to the spying, the bribing, the bullying, the threats of all these weapons, the false narratives, and all of these things, you have what's called this growing anti-Semitism. And I realized there was just a murder at a synagogue in San Diego, and anytime anyone is a victim of violence like that, it's horrifying and terrible. And so, I'll be watching to see what happens with those investigations. I see they have a suspect in custody or whatever. I'm not exactly sure, but I know that there's somebody they have who did it, who they say did it. But in any event, we have this concept that there's this huge, massive anti-Semitism now that's growing and growing. But a lot of it, in fact, is faked. There were a lot of people very concerned after Donald Trump got elected that there was anti-Semitism in the air for some reason, that he was a racist and a bigot, and that included anti-Jews. And there were hundreds of bomb threats and other threats made against synagogues and other Jewish facilities and organizations. There was just literally hundreds. Well, it was found out later that all of those threats came from two guys, and 90% of them came from one guy, and he was an 18-year-old Jewish American Israeli. And he was calling in and making all these bomb threats against these Jewish institutions. So that was a fake. There was a girl at college, and she said, somebody was drawing swastikas on the board outside of her room. And what a terrible thing, and how could anybody do this? Well, the college installed a hidden camera in the hallway, and found out it was the girl herself who was making those swastikas and stuff to get attention or whatever she was doing. And then just recently, there were alleged anti-Semitic attacks in a cafe in Winnipeg, Canada, that turned out to be staged by the owners themselves. So there's a lot of fake information. I could go on and on. I'll talk maybe some other day about the brainwashing that's occurred here within the cultural conversation, but we've hit on that in other talks. I just want to say that, it's all starting to unravel. The house of cards is starting to fall, and we just need to keep up the pressure of speaking the truth, not with hatred, but we love other people. And, our enemies are not, you know, just normal, regular, everyday people, but there's our enemy are the lies and deceits and crimes and corruption. Those are our real enemies. So thank you so much for listening to me go on and on. And now for something much more fun and interesting. Here's Mr. Sid.
Hello, hello, hello. We're going to run late tonight, so when Jan says the whole thing's over, we're going to keep going a little bit. First and foremost, happy Easter. Happy, happy, happy Easter. I went into church this morning, looked at a friend of mine. I said, Happy Easter. And he's like, what are you talking about? And everybody knows Easter was 2 weeks ago. I said, no, Happy Easter, Orthodox Easter. How can you have Easter before you have Passover? And he thought for a second. I said, it's just like the West, man. We get it in our head. We want to do it, and the hell with the rest of the world. Here we go. So just real quick, back 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I don't know. And as Jan started talking about Israel, I would bristle. I mean, really, I couldn't hear. And it literally took us 1 year to lay out the game work or the game plan or the floor plan or the outline of exactly what do you mean when you say Israel. And so we hashed that out a long time. And we are not talking about a bloodline, and we are not talking about a religion, and we're not talking about people of the book. All I hate is lying, cheating, and stealing. And
What you're saying is we're talking about a political entity,
yeah,
that has control in a certain
a
part
huge,
of the
you know, it's gotten to the point where, does the United States of America have a mercenary army? Yes, we do. Tell us where to go. We'll pay for it. It's on our nickel. So, you know, you have plans. I love China. They have a 1,000-year plan, 500-year plan, 100-year plan. You got to have a plan. And you come to the West where we live, and most people are like, oh my goodness, I haven't figured out what we're having for dinner. And that's the end of their plan.
That's me.
So does deep state Zionism have a plan, a greater plan? Like, what was the original land grant? Ooh, Lord, it goes up to the Euphrates River. Doesn't matter, a couple people in the way. Ooh, it goes down to the south too. It doesn't matter, a couple people in the way. Every now and then we have aha moments. And it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I saw this map and it clicked in my head. This is major, 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 major. Northern Europe, and especially with all the global warming, climate change, shifting towards the burning of natural gas. And natural gas is going to be the energy of the future. And they already get 60% from Russia. And back in 2000, the president of Qatar offered Bashar al-Assad a $12 billion pipeline deal. Now, scooch over just here. Because if you don't think it's about the oil or the gas, you're quite confused. Well, here's our little map-orama, and it literally does not translate over the computer. But you see 2 lines, okay? You have line A and line B. Line A, and this is the Persian Gulf right here. Largest natural gas deposit in the world. 100 years worth of natural gas to take care of Northern Europe. Well, line A comes out of a wonderful little country called Qatar. Goes across a bit of Saudi, misses Iraq, comes up through Syria, through Turkey, and then into Northern Europe. That's the plan that the good guys want.
Europe, yeah.
Who's the good guys? US, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Israel, England, France. I mean, how in the world? Plan B, I love Plan B because Plan B is like cool. Iran is to the north of the Persian Gulf. And the pipeline deal for Iran goes way up in Iran, cuts across Iraq, cuts across Syria, and you see the line goes out into the water. How can you put a line out into the water? Well, they're called LNGs, liquefied natural gas freighters. And with those, they would ship the gas up into Northern Europe. Well, Turkey would be left out of the deal. U.S. oil companies out of the deal. Israel out of the deal. Iran would establish a contract. So Northern Europe would be getting its natural gas from Russia and Iran. So you can see that this is something that would be worth a major, when you've got your 100-year plan, when you've got your 1,000-year plan, when you've got your plan in place, you never talk about your plan. I was thinking today, it's like a man comes to the door with a mask and a gun, and you answer the door and he says to the lady, "I'm here to sell Tupperware." Are you going to listen to their words or pay more attention to their actions? The words are just words, blah, 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 blah. You got to watch the actions, the actions, the actions, the actions. And when they start lining up, then you go, ah, that ties in with a 100-year plan. Okay. So,
How y'all doing?
every week we have a feature item. And this is, I'm going to tilt it and try not to drop it. What do we have here, dear?
We have French fries, which I made an hour ago, so they're not that exciting looking, and a garlic mayonnaise sauce. And I think we're yelling. Are we yelling? And the garlic mayonnaise sauce.
Hello.
Is the classic dip for French fries in Syria.
So, like, quick and dirty. Old neighbor we used to have, Roy. He would grow potatoes. And I'm thinking, that's about the dumbest thing I've heard. You can buy a 20-pound bag of potatoes, 50-pound bag of potatoes for $21. And Roy would bring over potatoes, and you'd take a knife and go to cut a potato, and the bloody thing would burst open, the internal pressure. Like a watermelon that you touch with a knife, it bursts open. And when you have those beautiful Syrian potatoes and, you know, this fine sauce.
Which he's never had before.
I've never had this before.
Time.
We are talking mayonnaise and garlic.
And I never eat French fries here in the States, but I go over there and I just love them. They have a certain way that they do them that they're just so crisp, delicately crisp on the outside and soft on the inside. And they have that nice smooth garlic sauce, and they make them with those fabulous potatoes. It's a land of fruitfulness and, you know, just a bounty of fruits, vegetables, grains, olives, etc. So it's really something to see the fruit of the land over there.
I'm such an American. I bring out my bottle of ketchup.
Well, in Syria, they put ketchup on pizza. So, you know, go figure.
There you go.
So I guess we're actually going to say goodnight. I think we did go over a little bit, not much. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you from Little Dog, who has a plan that is about 5 minutes in the future, you think, that long?
No, 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 no.
Not even that long.
Well, it's springtime, and we live on a little piece of land. And little dog follows me to the truck in the morning, and then I back the truck up to put the tools in. I open the door. Little dog's in the truck. Everything's fine. And it takes me a while to get the tools in the truck, and then I get to the truck, and little dog has calculated out all of his options and goes, I want to see what's on the other side of the hill. Boo.
Oh, he never ran off before, but
so I go to work by myself, and I come home at the end of the day. He's so excited. I'm so excited. Everybody's so excited. But he won't tell me where he's been and what he's been doing.
Well, I'm excited it's Sunday night and that you all joined us, and we love you, and I'll answer each and every comment sometime tomorrow. I'm actually going to an embassy. I think it's the Russian embassy tomorrow in D.C. to hear a talk about the white helmets. So I'll report to you all about that. I'm excited to go see that. So I might not get to your comments until a day or two after that, but I will read each and every one and answer each and every one. So thanks again, everybody, and good night.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
And you can't have Easter until you've had Passover. No can do.
Have a good night, everyone.
This is horrible.